So, all right. Okay, so welcome to the chapter meeting tonight, February 16th. And so the topic tonight is cities, companies, and Chicago driving climate action in 2023. And we'd like to thank Madeline Stanton for helping us get in contact with Karen Weigert, who will be presenting tonight. She's head of Loyola University's Baumhart Center for Social Enterprise and Responsibility. Karen will lead a discussion on what we can do this year to advance climate action. Cities and companies are crucial to the cause. So Karen runs the MBA program at Loyola that focuses 100% on environmental and social impact. Previously, she was the original chief sustainability officer for the city of Chicago during Rahm Emanuel's administration, and a writer and director of the 2011 documentary Carbon Nation, which was inspired by former Vice President Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth. Karen is on the radio every other week as a sustainability contributor for WBEZ Reset. So I'd like to welcome Karen to the meeting, and why don't we get started, Karen?
So thank you. Thank you all for taking a little time out of your Thursday, but more so, thank you all for the work that I know that this group is doing on climate. It is fantastic to get a chance to chat with you. I'm curious about who all of you are. I'm tempted to ask everyone, but I know that'll take a little while. So I'm happy to dig in a little bit, and then feel free to jump in, drop ideas in the chat, drop discussion in there. And I'm looking forward to spending a little bit of time with you all today. So we practiced the screen share. So I think I can officially screen share. So I'm going to jump in there and then kick us off. So let's see if it works. All right. I think it's up. Can you guys all see it?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Well, cool. Well, as I said, it's a pleasure to join you. And I know that this group is brought together by a sense of urgency, a sense of action, and I think a sense of community. We all want to get stuff done, and we know if we want to get stuff done, we have to do it together. So cities are absolutely the place to do it. Companies are increasingly important, particularly as we look at what might be happening this year. And of course, our home city and our home metro area of Chicago is central to all of this. So I want to get a chance to dig in a little bit on some of these big themes and how they work together, and having a lovely opportunity to really catch up and hopefully simply reinforce that the work you're doing to make an urban area and this urban metro more sustainable, to reduce emissions, and then to prepare for the changes that we know are coming, are absolutely critical. They matter not just for those of us who get to live in this great metro area, but they matter around the globe. So thank you for that. So let's jump in. We're going to start with cities. Global first, then we'll get to Chicago. So I want to start you with this picture. It's the classic NASA shot of the globe. And when you look at it, it's obviously an evening shot, so it's kind of dark here. It's dark when this was taken. You can see the cities. You can see the light that exists wherever humans are living in concentrated areas. And it's an incredible representation of the climate opportunities and the climate challenges to come. And so as you think about this urban work and this larger metro area work, that's part of this global need that we have as we think about where people are, where emissions come from, and therefore where we need to get solutions. So behind those dots is a global population that is now urban. So we passed the line where we went from the minority of people living in urban areas to the majority on the globe. And not only that, we're adding over 2 billion new residents by the year 2050. And mathematically, realistically, they're all going to live in cities if you look at the net growth in global population. So it's an extraordinary moment in world history. And it really speaks to the importance of getting cities right and understanding what that means, not just here in Chicago, but what that means around the world. And so when we think about these cities and where are they and what do they look like, it was interesting to dig in and get a glimpse, one projection, the best one I could find, on where the largest cities by population will be in the year 2050. So if you project out, this is where the largest cities are likely to be. So if you look, Chicago used to be in the top 25, by the way. The Chicago metro area will be, by 2050, will be 10 million plus probably in this metro area. But that won't rank us in the top 25. And so if we look, you're really looking Indian subcontinent, you're looking at Africa, a couple still in North America, none in Europe. So as you think about where the population is likely to be, it's spread out. The Indian subcontinent is the largest concentration of the largest cities projected by 2050. Next, you've got Africa. And it's worth thinking about the largest cities in the world. And we think about what that means. We're projected to double the square footage of buildings on Earth in the coming decades. So think about where this is going to happen. And then you see the rest of the world. So it's an incredible story of a transformation in where humans live and how they live. We're an urban planet now. The US is, depending on how you cut the numbers, is over 80% urban, meaning not rural. And so this is where the globe is heading. Now, if you take this map and you think about where all these cities are, and you dig in and you really think about the different parts of the planet where they sit in places that are already hot. So those concentrations of population are in places that today are hot, and as we know, are getting hotter. So it sets us up for this incredible question about how we think about that, how we understand emissions, how we understand threats to humans, where they're going to be, and how we think about the question of if people in all of these cities have the opportunity to have a North American lifestyle or a lifestyle that is middle class or upper middle class, they're going to need an extraordinary amount of air conditioning if the world continues to heat up the way it's heating. So this population concentration layered on top of that says we've got some work to do. This is what's powering way too much of all of those dots and those cities around the globe. And we've seen it. Certainly in Chicago, it was just about 10 years ago. We still had the last two coal-fired urban power plants in America were here. But we still have far too much from fossil around the world powering these cities. And as we know, it's not just the powering, it's that the majority of the population will be touched already by climate. We're seeing those weather changes. We see them here, certainly in Chicago, on a day when it's February and it was raining, when it was supposed to be snowing. And when you look at the Great Lakes and the ice cover is much lower than it should be at this point in the year. So we know. But it's part of this amazing global story. And the opportunity to get cities right is key. Now, one thing that's really interesting when you think about cities, though, is if you go back to these cities that are projected to be the largest in the world, if you take global carbon emissions per capita, we're at about 5 tons per person. All the wealthier cities are much higher than that per capita. So if you put Chicago, we would be in this group on the left of this graph. If you extend it out, all the rest of those cities are actually below the global average right now. So if we get this right, if we think about how we reduce our emissions here in the Chicago area, and so we pull the cities on the left down, and if we think about sustainable growth, if we think about different ways to build and power buildings and to think about urban form and transportation, the rest of these cities are below the average right now. So it's an incredible time, as I said, to really think about this and to really get cities right. So it's critical for emissions. It's where the vast majority of people in the US and around the globe live. And it's also gotten interesting. is cities are on the global stage in multiple ways. There's actually in the US now an ambassador role that is focused on subnational. So as opposed to it all being country to country, there's now a role that's literally looking at what happens within the US in terms of cities. If you look at the current cabinet, so President Biden's cabinet, he's got mayors in the cabinet. So this idea of cities and people who know how to make cities work are critical. So if you look at transportation, it's Mayor Pete from South Bend, so not only a mayor, but a Midwestern mayor, leading transportation. If you look at labor, although he announced, I think today he's leaving, Mayor Walsh from Boston leads labor. And Secretary Vilsack of Agriculture, he's been a cabinet member for a long time, is known as a governor, but he actually started as the mayor of Mount Pleasant in Iowa. So this importance of understanding cities is critical on the global stage. This year, for the first time ever, the Secretary of State in the US, Blinken, he actually went to the Conference of Mayors. That never happens. So not only do cities matter tremendously from an emission standpoint, we have this incredible point in time where the world is increasingly urban, but we have the opportunity to keep emissions lower. We have mayors in the US in critical roles as we think about national policy. So cities and your focus on this Chicago broader urban area couldn't be more important. But now if we think about this point in time, cities aren't the only player. And I think one of the incredible topics here is companies. So if we're looking at 2023 and we think about global cities, we also have to think about companies overall, and then a few in Chicago too. So one of the things that's been incredibly interesting in the company space has been this growth in ESG investing. And this idea that more and more people, many of you on the phone probably, are able to make choices about where your investment dollars go. And you're able to both screen out and screen in and look for investment opportunities that are driving carbon reductions. So ESG is obviously a broader frame, but it's been incredibly important to watch how more and more dollars are being aligned with this intent. Now, does it all work? Absolutely. There's a lot more we all need to do here, but we're seeing huge trends that are changing the way companies think about how they can drive capital attraction, and climate has been a growth factor in here. Now, fewer though than 1 in 200 companies actually has a really credible climate plan. So as we think about this, you're seeing huge interest from the market in aligning investment dollars with broader values, with climate being one of the major factors. But companies have goals, but there's a level of rigor that has yet to come here. So it's an incredibly interesting time right now to try to marry that interest with then delivery on carbon reduction. But you've got them coming. You've got science-based targets. You've got more and more folks looking this way, but we're not there yet. Just like we're not there on the cities yet. We're not there here yet either. As we look at 2023, though, one incredibly interesting thing to make sure we're all paying attention to is the SEC. And the SEC went through an entire public comment period last year, looking at regulation on climate and regulation on transparency in carbon. So they're making adjustments right now. They have not announced the final, but this actually has the potential to require carbon disclosure throughout the markets. It'll apply to essentially all publicly traded companies. And it'll be interesting to see exactly how far it goes. Key thing here is the rationale is this is essentially driven by investors wanting to have consistent, transparent data on material factors and on understanding the connections between companies and climate. So the SEC is not a climate activism world, but the idea that this is happening at the SEC and really, again, being driven by the investor view of having good data and knowing that climate is now a driver of risk and potentially opportunity. Absolutely a new stage. So this is the key thing to watch as you're looking at 2023 from the investment standpoint is what does the SEC do? So this headline I grabbed was just a couple days ago, but this has been an incredibly interesting opportunity and a space that takes us from the Wild West of what companies individually disclose to something that might be consistent investable data, a massive potential shift. So huge driver here as we're thinking together and we're thinking about 2023 and we're thinking about, the many ways that I'd like to think that we all vote every day. You vote every time you spend $1 on the future you want, which companies and which products you choose. You vote every time you invest, if you're lucky enough to have some investments. And then you get to vote when you go to the ballot. So I know those of us in Chicago, there's an election around the corner. So it's another time to vote. But lots of ways to be engaged. And then you vote with how you spend your volunteer time. It's a critical resource that changes the world every day. And I know you're all volunteering to be here tonight, so thank you. And as we think about companies and then we look ahead, I put this page on because it's all about Chicago. And Invenergy is on here. Huge wind company, large developer, largely of clean energy. That's part of their wind turbines from their photo. I put on there Buoyant Ventures. So they just announced a $76 million fund, 100% focused on climate. So that's an investment fund based out of Chicago. LanzaJet, Chicago metro area, focused on sustainable aviation fuel. It's got a $40 million investment from Bill Gates and Breakthrough Energy. And huge story. It's a drop-in fuel, so it doesn't require any change in the engineering of the planes and much lower carbon emissions coming through. And then I put the page that we've got, which is Baumhart Scholars. So the MBA program that I am lucky enough to lead now is 100% focused on impact, both social and environmental. But the idea that business skills can increasingly be used to make a better world is front and center. And we're lucky enough to work every day with people who are developing those skills to then scale in these ways. And these three companies that are here, Invenergy, Buoyant, and LanzaJet, they're all working in the markets today. So this is without any SEC regulation. This is without a price on carbon. This is without some of those things that ultimately can help drive scale. But it's going to be incredibly interesting as we think about companies and skills, the SEC being a huge one on financial disclosure. But you also have massive policy pieces that have come through both in Illinois and nationally. So Illinois, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, sets the stage with huge goals on electric vehicles and reductions in carbon from the power sources overall, transportation transformation, then job hubs and fundamental pathways for more people to be a part of the clean economy. That's just Illinois. And then we've got this huge federal backdrop of the Inflation Reduction Act, which sets up essentially 10 years of tax credits and carrots more than anything else to scale and grow and deliver less energy and more climate friendly opportunities, particularly for homes. There are actually dollars that are there to decarbonize your home. So there are many companies that can now scale, dollars that can assist everything from heat pumps for your home, all the way through potentially induction cooking, as we think about full electrification. So companies will actually be the ones delivering as we think about those policies and the scale that is coming. So incredible, incredible backdrop as we think about companies, both regulatory, potential SEC, but then also legislative and the dollars that exist both in Illinois and that exist nationally. And all of that starts to really flow now. So from these companies, let's dig in a little bit on Chicago. So first, let's take that step back as we think about overall emissions. So national carbon emissions, there's an EPA cut, transportation, electricity, industry, buildings, and ag. So nationally, we've got emissions coming from a range of sources. It shifts a bit when you get to our metro area. So when you're here, suddenly the majority of emissions are stationary. They're really driven by buildings, within the next source being transportation. So this is what we're up against as we think about how we're going to reduce emissions from the area where we live. So let's talk about this area where we live. So this is kind of what Chicago used to look like. So our city here, and those of you who are in the metro area, the city officially has the motto, City in a Garden. And if you go back, we're officially incorporated 1837. So I go back a couple hundred years. And this is a wetland. So it really was a garden. We have taken this very, very flat wetland and we've built a few things in it. And so there's a lot of urban planning, but that little wetland, even if you go back not too long after it was incorporated, has started to transform to a place of buildings and transportation. So we start with this heritage, and then we build. So in our garden, the city of Chicago is actually where the first skyscraper was ever built. Now, we've subsequently torn it down, quite honestly. But if you think about building and what happens, and how do we then find a place for all of us to be, Chicago, from the beginning, has been thinking about urban form and then thinking about the buildings within it. Now, what it's gotten us is this image, which I love. The left and the right are the same visually. You're looking down at Chicago from above. The difference is, and red means a lot, by the way, in both, and it's emissions. The difference here is that on the left, if you look at it, you're looking at emissions per acre. And if you look at emissions per acre, Chicago looks bad. It gets really red. And the rest of the area looks like it's better off. But if you flip it, and if you look at the chart on the right, that's sliced at emissions per capita. But you do it on emissions per capita, it's much, much lower in the city of Chicago. And it's lower actually in the suburbs than it is in rural areas. So it grows. So as we go back and we think about cities, companies in Chicago, this idea of getting cities right, particularly in economies like ours, you end up with lower carbon emissions per capita. We've got transportation here that's built in with transit structures. We've got a lot of smaller housing, shared walls, apartments and condos, and a great deal of walkability. So all of this work on building cities has actually resulted in a lower carbon profile if you're lucky enough to spend some time in the city. And if you spend some time in the suburbs, you actually probably have a lower profile than if you're in rural areas. All of those have opportunities, by the way, to reduce emissions, because as you know from the very beginning, the emissions coming out of Chicago are still higher than the global average. So we've done well. We've got a lot more to go. So every single part of this picture has an opportunity to reduce emissions, which is why I'm so glad that this group is doing that work, and so many others are doing this work and being thoughtful about the various sources from those prior pages, really about buildings. How do we heat, cool, and operate buildings? And then transportation, how do we move around? It's all critical. But we start with this underlying piece of the city and the structure and the city in a garden that we built. We see some benefits from a carbon standpoint. What's interesting also is there's been a lot of data that's come out on what it's like to be in different parts of cities. And as we think about climate, and we're fighting the fight on emissions, we know we've already emitted too much. And so we know that temperatures are changing. Increasingly, there's data, not just in Chicago, this is actually from other cities, but we see the same here, where historical redlining patterns and long-standing patterns of disinvestment have led to parts of the cities that are actually hotter than others. And so if you look at the city of Chicago, parts of the city, often correlated with race and income, are likely to actually be a couple degrees hotter on a hot day. So as climate gets worse, and as days are hot, vulnerability gets compounded because we have decades of not planting trees or of paving areas, and parts of cities are actually hotter than others. So a critical piece for all of us, it's not just that we get the city right, but that we get all of the city right, that there are multiple people and multiple voices that are brought forward as we think about how to ensure that our city is resilient while we're doing all the work to reduce emissions. So incredible amounts of work have been done, incredible amounts of work still to be done. This is City Hall's green roof. I'm a fan, obviously, no surprise, but it's native prairie up on the roof in City Hall downtown. A few trees over there on the side too, actually, but great for biodiversity. But a green roof insulates the top of the building. You need less air conditioning, so it reduces then the emissions that come from heating, cooling, and operating a building. And also captures a little bit of the stormwater. And as we know, as we see changes in the climate, you see more high-intensity storm events. Doesn't take it all, but it takes the edge off. So, pieces of building resilience into the city. I'll give you this picture. This is luckily, this is a before picture. Essentially, this is a cleanup site. This is in the city of Chicago. And as we think about neighborhoods and we think about access and what does it mean to live in that city where we want people living, if we can, where it's walkable, or if we're living in places where we have homes, we're able to actually experience outdoors and get that restorative opportunity. This is the before. This is the after. So we've been able to take land that had not been used and build in amenities and make it healthier for people to be outside. Give them opportunities to connect throughout our city. I'll give you another example. This is another before. So as we think about cities and climate-friendly cities, this is actually some of the pavement around a school in the city of Chicago. So think about this from a climate standpoint. First of all, it's just going to bake when it's hot out. And second of all, when you have rain, where's the water going to go? It's all going to run off. And as we know in the city, we have combined sewer systems. So water running off means water then combining with black water out of people's buildings, with runoff here, and then going where gravity takes it, which far too often is people's basements, particularly basements that don't have backflow protectors, and those things are expensive. So this is the before. And as we're thinking about ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to participate and have a day that can thrive even as the weather changes, as we continue to reduce emissions and recognize that summer's coming. This is the after. This is all built to capture stormwater. So this is permeable. This was just built in design with local residents. And what did the neighborhood need? Obviously green space, but place for kids, little curvy gardens, places to gather, a track where people could run. All of this is built in a way to capture stormwater. It's built in collaboration between city departments and nonprofits, and fundamentally about the voice of neighbors and neighborhoods. So as we think about building these cities and thinking about cities of the future, they can look like this and be climate friendly. So as we think about Chicago, there are examples like this. This is the Space to Grow program. So it's worked on dozens of schools all around the area. And it's an example of, as we think about these urban areas, thriving, inclusive, increasingly climate friendly, both reducing emissions, but then adapting to what we know we must. We're building it all here. We've got an incredible amount still to do, but building in transportation and transit. So even in the city or outside, if you're coming in on a metro, or if you're riding on the CTA in the city, that's our second largest source of emissions. But increasingly, this is an option for people. I do like to point out that if you've ridden on a CTA train, they all are run by electricity. So technically, you've been in an electric vehicle. Not your typical one, but those trains are all EVs. So we'll take credit. But huge opportunities to think about healthy, thriving urban communities. And if you're not riding the trains, maybe you're on a divvy. Maybe you're hopping on a bike and getting around in an incredibly carbon-friendly way, not emitting really at all, and getting a chance to bike through the city. There's great data, by the way, that people on bikes are more likely to stop than people on cars and spend some money in a local store. So always some good upside there. But as we think about this really big picture, as we think about cities, the importance of cities, the companies, the growth, the opportunities that will come, it's all about the lives that we give ourselves the chance to lead. In Chicago, if you go back a few decades, there were under 10 species of fish in the Chicago River. Now, thanks to Friends of the River and many others, there are over 70. That's a much more attractive place to be. It's a much healthier place to be. And as we know, the more people who are able to spend time and live in the city, the fewer emissions we have. So the more people who are able to live in this metro area, the fewer emissions we're going to have. So we want people attracted in and finding great ways and increasingly creating healthy opportunities for everyone to live here. And when we think about that, I'll leave you with this picture. So this is the Institute for Cultural Affairs in the city of Chicago, old building, beautiful building. Leslie Showers is the CEO, the executive director of ICA now. One of the biggest solar arrays in the city is sitting on top of that building. So as we go back to that largest source of emissions coming out, the heating, cooling, operating buildings, you've got solar on top of this building. You've got efficiency coming that then reduces what they need. And there's a solar draw then that is less than you would have had. This building and the leaders here are working with other buildings in the area to reduce emissions in multiple buildings. And they house nonprofits and support individuals as we think about creating that community and those opportunities to work together. So when I think about 2023, I think about the importance of building thriving cities. I think about the many things that we're doing in terms of a reduced carbon and renewable electricity supply, both for the city and for residents. I think about efficiency and reducing what is happening in buildings, the huge dollars that exist now at the state and at the federal level. But really, I think about how we build great places for all of us to live, work, and play, and how we do that with skills, policy skills, volunteering skills, business skills. And we think about those unique inflection points, about where people live, about where people work, and about the policies, the programs, and the cultures we build to support a healthy, thriving lifestyle for absolutely everyone. So thank you. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Thank you. So let's take a look at the chat.
Take a look at the chat.
So let's take a look at some of the questions and we can do
Yeah, what you got?
Q&A. Can you see this, Karen?
Pull it up.
Yeah, I can see the chat.
Okay, so would you mind kind of looking down a list and maybe making some comments? Let's see.
I love that the first comment that I see is from Jeff Green. I love your last name, Jeff Green. That's just awesome. So question, they're almost all coastal cities. What about the impact of sea level rise? Yeah, great question. And you're absolutely right. It's a challenge and it's going to be a bigger challenge. If you look at sea level rise and you look at global population centers, there are strong connections there. And if you look at places where there's been economic damage from water and storms, you see the economic damage being highlighted in places that are wealthier cities, but the human cost isn't going to be something we have to all be very, very cautious about. So yes, Chicago, like many cities, sits on a body of water, but we sit differently. We sit on the Great Lakes and here with the river. Cities are typically built around water. So yes, this is absolutely something we have to pay attention to. And it's absolutely going to be questions on what can you do to reduce that rise and what can you do to protect parts of cities.
So Karen, there's a question about would that apply to jet aircraft for profit? I think that's kind of a partial question. Do you trying to connect?
Yeah, I know that might be a LanzaJet question. That's what I'm guessing. I'm just going to guess that. But yeah, LanzaJet is building sustainable aviation fuel for commercial flights and private flights. So it's regular aircraft fuel.
Dolores, did you have a further question? Did that answer your question?
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm referring to jet plane pollution in general. So, every jet engine, right? So it's just a gargantuan amount. So, and I think it's often not taken into account and factored in. And I'm saying it must be from now on. So
yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the language I tend to hear is it's a hard to abate sector because large aircraft, the weight of batteries doesn't allow it. So, and you have a very high performance level. You can't just suddenly have the aircraft not flying. So yeah, there are very specific focus areas around aviation. This is a part of that piece, not by any means all of it. And this is scaling up. It's early. Sadly, still early.
Thanks for your presentation work. I really think trains, passenger rail, we need a working passenger rail system in this country. And to me, that means abolishing, most routine mass transportation by jet plane. That's how I phrase it. So except for maybe like the across ocean flights, that's already happening in France. They're starting to ban, jet aircraft flights on routes where there is high speed, where there's passenger rail.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
it's gonna be interesting. Super
Actually, surprisingly enough, the cars that we all drive are actually most of the emissions in the transportation sector, with buses and trucks a lesser amount. However, when you look at, the need to do more mass transit, of course, it's to get those cars off the road. So jet planes look like a horrible, terrible thing, but on a cost per mile basis, it's not as bad as it looks. I don't want to minimize it, but I think it's, I don't know, Karen, if you know off the top of your head, I think it's like 2 or 3% of transportation emissions.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I disagree with that. I think that's playing with statistics, damn lies and statistics. So I actually don't believe that statistic. I mean, you just look at the amounts of how many flights there are and how much there is.
Okay, but we got 285. I don't want to argue this, but we have like 285 million cars. Okay. So the numbers I threw out were approximate and they were from the EPA. So I'm just going with that, Dolores.
I think it's safe. I think it's
Next
safe to
question.
say we've got some decarbonizing of transportation writ large out
I'm
there.
not saying it's not an issue. I'm just,
No.
anyway. So we say, okay, math nerd question. Does transportation include electricity powered transit? Typically the emissions, I don't think, Karen, the emissions would be coming from like internal combustion engine and things like that, right? The EVs.
Typically, that's what you're looking at. I mean, obviously, as people get more sophisticated on tracking some of this, and as EVs grow, right now, EVs are a teeny tiny percentage of the cars that are out there. So you're really talking internal combustion engines right now.
Yeah. And then, Chris.
Back to the jet question, because one of the things that I see, and maybe I'm not seeing this clearly, is that a lot of air travel is discretionary, right? We voluntarily choose the plane for our vacations. Not me, I haven't been on a plane since 2006, but many of us do. Whereas a lot of us are sort of locked into using our cars. So I think there's a standard, at least for me, like if I can eliminate a source of emissions because it's something I do for fun versus a source of emissions that I'm doing because I have to get to work, there's, some things I can sort of scratch off my list more easily. So that's why I just want to sort of come back to what Dolores brought up about jet fuel.
Yeah, it's clearly an issue, so we don't want to disagree with that. But if you just look at this for just a second, we do have to keep in perspective all of these things that we're talking about. And if we look at really what the EPA has to say, it looks like this. Sorry. Yeah. So the right side is basically what Karen presented earlier in her presentation. The left side. The right side is the breakdown of that transportation pie of 29%. You see light duty is 59%. Aircraft is 10, so I was off. It's 10%. It's huge and pollution is bad. Rail is fairly small. Medium, that would be the trucks and buses and things like that. So it's a pretty significant area.
There's so much about it that's not factored in, I believe. It's also emitted at really high atmosphere, and what's that doing to the Earth's atmosphere? The chemistry, what I mean? So.
Well,
Okay.
I love that this group just digs right into it. I kind of expected that. Like that was my take, is that this is the group that's about get stuff done, figure out what matters, and go take action on it.
Exactly.
So absolutely, we should all dig in there.
Yeah.
We should dig in on every piece of data we can, and then find those places where we, in our unique opportunities with the skills we have, the time we have or don't have, the networks we have or don't have, where we can go have some impact. The fact that you're all spending part of your Thursday night, many of you I know just got off of work, and this is how you're spending it. That's a good thing.
Yeah, and for all those that are interested, we have a team that's dedicated to buses and trucks and electric buses and transit, basically transit. And then there's another group that deals with that, the cars and so forth. So we haven't yet focused on aircraft, but anybody who's interested could join one of these groups and put their feelings out there and we look at it. All right, let's look at some other things. When doing greenhouse gas inventory, it's typical to only count the emissions once. I would say so, yes. Chris, you were saying that, right? There was another question. I guess this was my response about the registration. So EVs are 6%, about just under 6% of all automobile registrations in the United States. We're just way, way behind Europe and Asia right now. But it is growing very fast right now, and that's the good news.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting as we see more and more charging infrastructure coming in. There's a lot of federal dollars will go to that, and some of the state as well. So as we're seeing it, the growth in EV adoption has been wild. I always find it interesting that I can say always, because I think the last 2 Super Bowls, there have been tons of electric vehicle ads. That is just not what was happening a few years ago in the Super
Yeah,
Bowl. And now I watch because I want to see which kind of EVs are going to be advertised. I mean, Will Ferrell, does he ever do anything other than EVs? I don't think so. So great tipping point there. The fact that the Ford F-150, which is the #1 selling vehicle in the United States, now has an electric, the Ford F-150 Lightning, that's a game changer. Particularly when we think about the many folks who do not live in cities, that is a critical vehicle for work and for life. And the fact that there's now an electric, and the ads are fantastic in terms of it being a backup power supply for your house and independence. This is a really interesting transition point. So transportation is huge. Electric vehicles getting huge too.
Yeah, the Chicago Auto Show has, I think, 20 EVs to go out, ride, and so forth. So if anybody's interested, get down there and take a look at them. All right, so we'll go down the list here and see what else we got. Does anybody get to go on the green roof at the city hall? I don't know much about that. So.
Okay, it's true. You can't just go see City Hall's green roof. It's absolutely the case.
I guess Karen's in there though.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to be there. There are multiple green roofs around the city, and I will give you the easiest one that nobody ever knows about, and that is Millennium Park is actually a green roof because it is over that parking and rail infrastructure. It may still be the largest in the world. So when you are downtown, go to Maggie Daley Park, go to the Lurie Garden, see prairies, and hang out on a massive green roof.
Okay, so Karen had asked a question about getting the city of Chicago to treat the ash borer, protect trees. Any thoughts on that, Karen?
Yeah, well, first of all, I was doing some volunteer work in the Forest Preserve just this past weekend, and there were multiple dead ash trees, and you could see the emerald ash borer pattern right there. It's already been through those, so those are all lost. There's a great question here on treatment of trees, cost of trees, replanting of trees. The city's now establishing an overall tree board. Obviously, Morton Arboretum in the region in terms of leadership, Open Lands and others in terms of local leadership. Your inflection points there. Forestry is actually in the Department of Streets and Sanitation. You've obviously got a sustainability office in the mayor's office. Parks has its own trees. But yeah, I think there's an incredible question. And then there's the long-term, what are we planting in the city so that we have a diversified canopy, so that we don't have the opportunity for something to come wipe out a very large portion of what we have. So it is a difficult challenge. It was unpleasant to see dead trees this weekend and to see signs of the emerald ash borer.
Exactly. Yeah, so and Madeline Stanton put some links in here about the Baumhart Center. So anybody who's interested can click on those links.
Oh yeah, thank you.
And let's see. Millennium Park garages have EV chargers now. I guess I haven't been there lately.
Yeah, that's awesome. They're actually doing some incredibly cool work in terms of innovating on energy. But so yes, so not only can you go hang out on a green roof, you can actually charge a vehicle.
There's a question about Solar for All program. Do you have any insights on that, Karen?
You said on Solar for All?
Yeah. Ask about Solar for All, why is Sunrun program, and why Sunrun is a vendor for Chicago. They do not have a very good rep, blah, blah, blah. I don't know much about that.
Yeah, I can't really comment on that.
Can I finish? Since it's my question and you just turned my question into blah, 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 which felt a little disrespectful to me, to be
Sorry.
honest. The reason I'm asking this question is because I'm one of the people in my community with solar, and I get a lot of questions. People want to go solar, and I want to be able to refer them to Solar for All. I live in a low-income community, and I want to know if there's another vendor. And Karen, do you know anything about the Solar for All program in Chicago?
So first of all, I'm delighted, A, that you've got solar, B, that you have solar in a low income community, and I'm delighted. My understanding, and I'm 600 miles away from this conversation, but I think Elevate leads that or has led it, Elevate Energy. In general, they're a fabulous nonprofit. So I would reach out to Elevate Energy, and they would be a great pathway to have the opportunity for more homes in all neighborhoods, particularly low to moderate income neighborhoods, have that opportunity to have solar. So Elevate, without a doubt. Great group.
I think the only other question we have in the chat is about, for those who can't afford an EV, will the Illinois emissions test requirements change for gas cars? I haven't heard anything on that.
That I don't know. I do. So I don't know. In relation, the sticker prices of EVs are much closer to internal combustion engines, and there's growth in the secondary market. And so what's particularly interesting is you're looking at some of the rebates that are coming now for electric vehicles. They can be used for used cars. So that is a huge change in terms of breaking down that first cost barrier and creating a more inclusive pathway to electric vehicles. So I'm hoping that creates more avenues for more people, if they are do have the opportunity to purchase a car. If they're looking to buy a used car, there actually will be rebate dollars available to make that an EV choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any other questions not in the chat that we can ask Karen about?
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead, Pam.
Karen, you know, we have a suburban climate action team as a part of the chapter, and one for the city. And what's really become clear, and just say a few words and then ask you this, what's really become clear is that so much of the decision making in these large urban areas is done by individual suburban municipalities, small and large villages, where often the people that are in charge or in elected positions are just not aware or not on board with the kinds of climate solutions that, say, the city might be. For, you know, we have very conservative, in general, suburban areas around the city. And most of them don't have climate action plans even, we've found. And those that do might not have implemented them. And so what I guess I'm asking is, I see that there's a tremendous opportunity to work in cities, but I also see this decentralized decision-making across large metropolitan regions as an enormous barrier to change. And so I would just like your thoughts about that, how you might approach it, what you would suggest.
Yeah.
Because it's not only in Chicago where this is being experienced.
Yeah, and to your point, that carbon doesn't know where it came from. Water doesn't know where the political lines are drawn. So we have to figure out how to work around that. And it's absolutely true. The political lines don't align with ecosystems. They are just there for other reasons. So yeah, that's an extra challenge for us, particularly in a large metro area. I've definitely seen tons of really good work with lots of municipalities of all different sizes through the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. So a big shout out to Edith Macra, who leads that, and have seen many, many mayors of cities of all sizes, cities, towns, and villages, and elected leaders jump in there. She's actually helped collate essentially a climate action plan for the region, and with options that can work with cities of all sizes. So I think work like that is absolutely key. Absolutely, cities of all sizes don't have the staffing that I'm sure they all want for many topics, and climate being one of them. So engaged citizens, helping to find it, here's a best practice, we could do it, helping to think about choices that could be made, absolutely key, particularly when there isn't fully staffed leadership. Also recognizing lots of these choices are choices that we get to make, we as residents. And so I'm delighted that so many of you are in all different parts of this larger area. But yes, regional urban planning is not something that we're structurally set up to do very well. So we have to do things like the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. We have to think about Metropolitan Planning Council in the region, or the RTA looking at transit, not just in the city, but looking at the metro. So there are some ways that it happens. We need to do better, without a doubt. Structures help, but people getting involved really help.
Other questions? Jeff, go ahead.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for that talk. It was really interesting. You covered a lot of good information. Pam Tate and I are working on a project to get the city council to require the legal department to file suit against fossil fuel companies. And we've gotten as far as getting a resolution introduced in the council and assigned to a committee, I think Health and Human Relations or Health and Human Services, I'm not sure exactly the name. Would you be interested in letting us pick your brains on two areas: how to connect with Angela Tovar, who I guess is a successor of yours, and how to connect with WBEZ and maybe get some publicity for the resolution.
I love this group, not shrinking violets at all. Like, jump in and make things happen. So in terms of the mayor's office and Angela, who absolutely, she's the chief sustainability officer today, and she does a lot of actual events and engagement and outreach. So I think that's probably one way to think about it. Another is, if you're in the city, to go through your older person, because they have obviously direct routes. It sounds like you've got an ordinance or resolution that's already in a committee. So there's some very cool routes there. And then, in terms of WBZ, people are always looking for interesting stories. So as you're thinking about what's happening, I'm happy to learn more. And we're always trying to understand what are the ways that Chicago connects to the nation and the globe, particularly with the lens on sustainability and climate. And that we're looking to understand what's happening and what could happen. What can our residents learn about, and then what can residents go do?
Karen, we have made a couple of requests, sending in the form to WBEZ, but it hasn't. I like your air quotes. But it hasn't gone anywhere so far. So if there's some other more effective way to do it, I'd sure like to know.
Well, that's a good start, actually, to send in the form. But afterwards, I'm happy to learn more about what this initiative is, if that's helpful. But if you've sent in the form, you're officially in the process. There are producers who are reviewing things and thinking about the content. But yeah, I'm curious to learn more. I know actually, when I think about the stories and the ways to engage people, one of the things I've always really appreciated is the Winter Film Festival. And the way that they bring together environmental filmmakers and stories. And one of the films that was featured, I think 2 or 3 years ago, was actually about the young Americans who filed suit on behalf of climate. And so that legal route is one that is incredibly important, and to see a lot of the environmental progress that's been made over the last decades has been the legal path, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act.
Okay.
Karen, is your email available?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm easy to find. So it's kweigert@luc.edu. So that's my official easy to find email.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Donna, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question as to whether there's an approved list of community solar companies within the ComEd region. there's lots of people who aren't able to get solar on their own homes. So how does one go about really understanding what the best community solar companies are?
Yeah, the community solar question is incredibly important. And I don't know if there's an approved list. I think that was your very specific question. My default is going to be similar. I would go to Elevate. They've done a lot of work in solar and in the community side. So I would actually reach there as a place if there's not an obvious one. And I'm obviously many degrees of separation from some of these questions, but in terms of guidance and organizations that I know do great work, they're up there.
Thanks.
Any others? Any other questions? The meeting's coming close to the end,
Yeah.
not quite though. We have a little time. Any more questions? John, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, or even when you're asking a question, if there's something you're working on that you want me to know about, I'm all ears. So don't be shy about saying here's what you're working on. But
Go
happy to
ahead,
dig
John.
in.
I'm just drawing attention to comments in the chat about the charging deserts on the south and west side of Chicago. And if I've understood right, doesn't the IRA have money for a lot of charging and a lot of it is targeted for those communities, or am I misinterpreting there?
It does.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly the charging desert is something that is an absolute barrier, without a doubt, particularly when you layer that in with the number of individuals who live in multifamily housing. So if you have a charging at home, that's the primary charging place. So if you have your own garage, that is one option. If you live in an apartment or a condo, it's different. And so there's more and more work to try to make that possible. But public charging is key. So I'm glad you're even asking that question. So yeah, there should be some, but we're gonna have to make sure that it reaches throughout the city and throughout the
John.
suburbs. I know there are a lot of folks in the suburbs on the call.
Yeah, so the government is just releasing as part of the IRA, $7.5 billion to do this. And I think a vast amount of that is for NIVI, which is basically, charges along highways and, like every 50 miles, things like that for people traveling. But I think about 2.5 billion or two for the areas that you're describing, places where, low income and things like that. So any other questions?
Tom, can I?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Karen.
This may be a little bit tangential, so feel free to say you don't know, but I've been wondering if you know anything about the Redefine the Drive project that's kind of been percolating in the city, where they're talking about expanding Lakeshore Drive that would really impact the parks and trees along the drive. And just curious if you know anything about that. I'm just
No, I probably know what you know, which is what we've all seen and read. So I don't have anything extra there on that one.
Anything else?
Hi, this is Cheryl Watson. I'm the one that's making the comments about the south and west side being accessible to chargers, and we've been trying to figure out some things, just the way it's laid out with all those apartment buildings, and it's difficult to figure out how to place them and then have the resources and the knowledge base in the community to take on those projects. But more than anything, the economic problems it make it just cost prohibitive. Even when you look at the used cars, it's still cost prohibitive. If you on the south side, you see a lot of Kias, and those lower end cars, which they now are stealing from people, carjacking people to use them for crimes because they didn't have that security built in. So now Kia is, doing a recall, and they're going to do all of this. But these are the type of, cumulative impacts that fall upon those communities. I live here too. I would love to have an electric car, but I probably won't because I'm a senior and I don't have that kind of money. But these are real issues that are specific to certain economic situations and, continued disinvestment. So that makes it very hard to keep up with the wave of innovation. And as I said, it's cumulative. So I think I would like to know more about where to go to get the information to maybe have that discussion and help start thinking about how to best do that. Because that mental understanding of all of this is just, it's not in our communities. We don't have community groups that are really readily stepping up on all of these issues because there's so many other things. The violence alone is taking up a lot of community groups' time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cheryl, so I've written that down, and we have a team that's, in fact, meeting Monday. We have an EV team that works on issues just like that. So I'll make sure that the team knows about this, and you're certainly welcome to come and make your case on the types of things we ought to be working on, which makes sense what you're saying. Karen, did you want to comment though on that?
Yeah, and Cheryl, thank you obviously for raising the topics, and it goes back to different parts of Chicago are very different. And I think about a couple of groups in I'm not sure which neighborhood you're in, but certainly Naomi Davis in Blacks and Green has been very, very engaged, not specifically on electric vehicles. I think she has charging in front of her location, but in terms of access and opportunity. And then I think a bit about also some of the Jitney EV work in Bronzeville.
Yeah, those
two that jump to
areas.
mind.
Yeah, those areas are very well steeped in what's going on. You know,
Yeah.
they have all of the resources coming their way. But if you go to the west side or Chatham or,
Yeah.
further south, you don't have environmental movement going on. You don't have a community group that's focused on that. The main focus right now is just safety. The
Yeah.
violence that's, ratcheted up even in the nicer communities like Chatham, where I live, we're being overrun with violence. So that's what all the discussion is for the aldermanic elections that are going on
Yeah.
right now is about violence. I can't get a word in edgewise on anything environmental.
Wow.
Well, Cheryl, first of all, I'm sorry to hear it, and obviously, there are many things that we collectively need to do differently and better in the city, in all of our neighborhoods. But violence is disproportionately impacting neighborhoods. And Chatham, I think you also have incredible flooding challenges.
Oh yeah, and we have
Yeah.
a tree canopy
Yeah.
issue because they cut a lot of those diseased
Yeah.
trees down, but people didn't want them back because they had problems with the roots. People tell you it's not the roots, but yes, it is. The roots, if the tree is planted too close to the sewer line and water's leaking, the roots become extremely invasive into your line, and you have to get that line replaced. And the fees that the city charged to do it, and the two visits from a plumber. So just think about that added income impact. So a lot of people, the issues that are in our communities, they're different. And so you have to really be nimble in changing how you're perceiving an issue. Trees in some other neighborhood, that neighborhood may have been laid out better, but we just have a lot of, like, the trees were just placed in a hodgepodge manner, and now they're 100-year-old trees and they've outgrown the parkway, and the city does not have a process to deal with when a tree is way too large and is interfering with the utilities that are all out there on that parkway. And that's the challenge. You can call and tell them it's a problem, but they're like, well, we don't just cut down trees. Well, what about human safety and the cost to the homeowner when there's damage?
Yeah. Well, we're pretty much out of time. Cheryl, thank you very
Yeah, I
much.
know. I just wanted to get in there because
Yeah, that's okay. We've got it on, we've got it recorded. We've got things in the chat. We'll make sure everybody gets a copy of this recording. It'll be on YouTube, so you'll all get the link. Also the chat as well. I want to thank Karen very much for her great presentation tonight. Thank you very much, Karen.
Thanks,
And,
everybody. Thanks for inviting me. And really, thanks for doing the work.
Yeah, thank you. And before we go, I just want to mention that we have an election right now for various positions within the chapter. So chapter chair, vice chair, communications chair, membership chair, public education, and some at-large positions where people can join the leadership team in the chapter. So if you go out, I put in the chat, which I'll make sure everybody gets, you'll see the link to the web page for the chapter. And if you go over to the, I'll make a note that you go over to the membership events page and you can see it about the election. But basically, the nominations for various positions started on January 22nd. We're announcing it again here at February 16th. Self-nominations for positions that people would like to take starts on March 9th. I'm sorry, they close on March 9th, so they're open right now. March 10th, we'll announce it again at the next chapter membership list of who's eligible. And then we'll mention at the March 16th chapter meeting. Voting ends at midnight on March 23rd. And then we'll announce the results of the new elections for positions. So please join us and help lead the way for all the things that we've been talking about tonight. We have something like 12 different teams besides the election, electric vehicles team, transit teams, tree teams, regenerative agriculture teams, diversity fund sponsor teams. I'm sure I'm missing some, Pam. What did I miss one?
Solar,
Solar. Yeah, that's a big one. Solar.
yeah, climate action, the
EV.
suburban team. Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, EV team. So I'll make sure that I list this information in the notes from this meeting and the teams that are available besides the election. Thank you very much, everybody. We're ending right on time now tonight. And thank you, Karen, once again for presenting for us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.